everyone. Welcome to Vital Wisdom with me, Dr. Eli Camp. And today I've got an episode planned where I want to talk to you about the V's, vitality. I have a great case to go over. And I'm going to start us off today talking about the history of germs. And this is important because the way folks have come to understand germs and how they might or might not be responsible for things in the world has a lot to do with why the vis or vitality of a person and therefore their ability to weather the storms of life and illness and things like that sort of took a back seat to this thing called germ theory, which it turns out is kind of faulty and not at all accurate. So, way back, the history of germs. Let's start there. There was this guy in the mid 1400s. Now, before the 1400s, we have to think about the Egyptians and the Greeks and even folks in Asia who have a long and vibrant medical knowledge history. And there are all kinds of ideas, and they used different words to describe things. So I'm zooming us forward to the 1400s because this is kind of the basis of how we see modern day medicine, regardless of the paradigm, starting about this time with things being documented and eventually microscopes being invented, and they could see things that you couldn't see with the normal eye, like the naked eye. So I'm jumping through and past probably some very important parts of history in how humans were starting to explore medicine and things like that. But in the mid 1400s, there was a scientist, his name was Geronimo Fracastorius. And he really began the modern day conversation of germs, explaining that there were entities that when they found suitable ground and animal heat, they would flourish. Now, this is very interesting because to me, that's the very beginning seeds of terrain therapy. Not that there aren't germs out there. So I'm not in the camp of doctors or practitioners who believes there's no such thing as a germ. I don't believe that. I do think that there are entities out there that can cause problems. But I think that's a smaller part of the picture, and that the terrain, the health of the body, the conditions that those particular germs find, that is actually more important. Anyway, Geronimo was followed by Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch guy in the late 1600s, and he made a microscope for himself. And he claims to have seen entities in his microscope in spit, right, in saliva. And he announced this and all of this stuff. We know likely now these are two very common bacteria that you find in saliva. And then in the late 1700s, there was a gentleman named Plensitz who postulated, without much evidence, right? He was reading older works and thinking as scientists think, and he had sort of this idea that maybe every disease likely had a causative agent. Well, Florence Nightingale, about 100 years later, promptly shred that idea to bits because that's not what you see clinically, right? That was about the mid 1800s. And then this name hopefully you recognize Florence Nightingale, but then Pasteur, some 20 years or so after Nightingale, with the help of the King of France, who was his friend, plagiarized and stole other people's bench work or scientific work, and he decided to establish this new germ theory that was very much like the guy from Vienna, Plensitz, to say that germs cause disease. And there was a mass marketing campaign. This was about the time when cows were starting to be inoculated. There's all kinds of facts to this story that's important for you to understand how this faulty germ theory came to rule the world. The perspective suggested that infectious disease, resulted from exposure to particular microorganisms. And this meant that a person was perpetually at the mercy of microorganisms, which could cause death without any level of protection. And as a result, people became frightened to be around anyone who was sick for fear they might catch something. And many people willingly accepted this idea that vaccination was a way to save the human race. Okay, well, concurrently, at the same time, there was another theory of health that had been developing just as long, perhaps even longer. And today we call it the terrain theory. And this theory held that the internal environment of a person's body, or any system, right? The health of the cells and the tissues of that system was the most important thing in determining susceptibility to illness. And that if a person had good metabolism, strong immunity, normal detoxification, that person was not as susceptible to disease as someone who was run down, malnourished, not detoxifying, under stress, etc. It's really interesting to me that prior to the existence of germ theory, from the time of Hippocrates, and even prior to Hippocrates, and we can see it in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, it was widely believed that imbalances in the body caused illness and disease. And if unclean air, or something they called miasma, which is an old term describing unhealthy elements surrounding people, if that affected the body, it was because the body had a susceptibility or a vulnerability for that illness. Germs, as we call germs, consist of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protozoa. These are germs collectively. There's 4 big categories. And of all the germs, only a very small number, less than 1%, are believed to be able to even make a human sick. And that's even if the human is susceptible. So today there's a huge divide, as you probably know, between germ theory and terrain theory, a huge divide between those camps. But there is a middle ground that has developed where terrain is acknowledged as likely the most important factor, but also considered as the level of exposure to germs, meaning the healthier you are, or the more vital, the better you fare, and the higher exposure of germs you can handle and weather before you show signs of infectious illness. And I'll tell you, if you want to read a really good book about germ and terrain theory, let me see if I can get this here. There's this book here. It's called The Champ or Pasteur, A Lost Chapter in the History of Biology by Ethel Hume. You might really enjoy that. The ISBN number is 146-790-0125. It's really good. So, of course, it's clear that I am mostly in the terrain camp, but I believe that there is something to the level of exposure to something that you have. There's also the life cycle of certain germs. So if you look at any of the charts that are out circulating today, where it shows that a new flu or a flu strain comes out and it's very high incidence among the populations for a few cycles, and then it drops off. That is the normal pattern of how flu viruses seem to affect the human race. That would include COVID. Often, and it's not just flu, there's other infectious diseases that we have named that do the same thing. And it's very interesting. And if I can find a picture of this, when we talk about infectious disease, I will show you the charts. How most vaccines were introduced after the numbers had already started to flatline. And this comes from the CDC. I'm not making it up. I'm not pulling it from weird places. I'll show you the charts when we have that in an upcoming episode when we talk about infectious disease from the vitalistic model. So that takes us into vitality then, right? The V's. And how strong is that in someone? And we say, what is their vitality? So let's talk about that next. So as we're talking about vitality, since this is a very important part of keeping the body healthy, strong, and as resistant to not only infectious disease, but long-term health and avoiding chronic illnesses, there are specific traits that show vitality. You know, as humans, we know it when we experience it or see it in another person, even if you don't realize that you're seeing it. And for someone who knows to look for these signs, whether it's in someone else or in yourself, because remember, I believe we are our own best doctors, there are signs of the vitality that flows through us and is in us. And I mentioned these in an earlier episode. When we have someone whose vitality is strong, we see it in their eyes, which are bright and shining and clear. The skin is clear, and we have a robust complexion where, you know, we can tell that there's blood flow to the skin, and not too much, right, in any one area. The nails and the hair are strong and lustrous. Our muscles are toned. We have energy. We call it enduring energy. We sleep well. Our digestion is strong. And when we have strong digestion, we have good absorption and can use those nutrients that we're absorbing. We have bowel movements every day, and not too many, but the right amount. We have a stable and predominantly a positive mood. These are just a short list of things that help us know when someone is vital. And I observe these things as a practitioner when I am taking in a new case and evaluating someone's state of health and their vitality. In addition to the list I just gave, there's other ways to evaluate vitality. Here are some questions I ask my patients and clients to ask themselves before they come in for their first visit with me, so they can be thinking about their sort of state of health and the state of their vitality. I ask them, how often and for how long are you sick? Never getting sick is not a sign of health. As odd as that might sound, we want to see visible signs of a cold or a fever a couple of times a year. This is one way that we know our body is working and doing what it is designed to do. On the other hand, being sick all the time is a red flag, and that indicates our vitality isn't enough to keep us, to get us well, for our body to heal itself. With kids, I think about once a month, when they're down and out for about 24 hours, especially if they're hanging around other kids. Perhaps you see a slight fever or a little bit of low energy, but within 24 hours, all is well. They're back up and at it. And it might be less often, it might be once a quarter, but it's a few times a year. And adults, about once a quarter, same as kids, right? You're down and out, you need to bundle up and rest your body. Your body's trying to clean itself out. It's reacting to, you know, these built up toxins that happen and trying to clear toxemia. And, you know, the immune system is at work doing what it needs to do. And that shows up often as what we think of as symptoms of a cold or a short flu. Are you in constant pain somewhere in your body? Aches and pains here and there are pretty normal, especially for very active people. And kids might have some extra growing pains here and there, but ongoing pain every day, that is draining your vitality. Something's going on. Do your joints, muscles, or nerves hurt? Do you have constant headaches? Do you ache or experience soreness all the time? You know, Do you find that you have to take something to take the edge off of pain that you're experiencing? These are signs that something is not as it should be. And constant or frequent pain in particular can lower vitality. And simply to be able to keep going, folks will self medicate, suppressing what the body is trying to tell them. So this directly lowers vitality. It is okay to have an ache or a pain here or there once in a while, especially if there's been some kind of trauma or extreme work, but with rest or some other type of treatment like hydrotherapy that assists the body in healing, it should clear up within a few days. And if it does, we know that our vital force is at work and our vitality is good. How about your energy level? What's the energy level? Do you wake up in the morning feeling refreshed, like your batteries have been recharged? And can you go all day or most of the day on your feet, moving here and there? How are things in the late afternoon? Do you have the energy to make dinner or clean up dishes, maybe take a walk after you eat? You know, for folks 70 or older, do you take a nap in the afternoon? That's a good thing, right? For how long? Do you need coffee in the afternoon to make it the rest of the day or some other type of stimulant? When our vitality is strong, we have what it takes to make it through the day. We wake refreshed. We should recharge with a couple of breaks during the day, but the energy we need is there for the asking. Like I said, when we hit 70 or older, it is a great idea to take a rest in the afternoon. And not everyone needs to do that, but it's a great idea. And it's good for us too. There's many cultures around the world that have a siesta in the afternoon. This allows your body to sort of recharge from the first part of the day and get ready for the next part of the day. How about your outlook on life? How do you experience life? Do you look forward to each day with confidence that you can navigate whatever comes up? Do you find joy and wonder in the minute-to-minute happenings? Are you motivated? You can complete tasks. You can stay mentally focused. Or are you lost in the past? Are you dreading with what might happen? If that happens, something, is life a joy or is it a burden? And when our vitality is strong, the more likely it is we have a positive outlook and can count on ourselves to navigate the waters of life. Have you ever heard that saying, someone has the constitution of an ox? It's an old saying, common amongst farmers and country people. This is someone with vitality, and it is noticeable. The more vitality a person has, the greater their resilience to illness and stress, the faster they recover from acute injury or illness, the easier it is for them to adapt to changing seasons and temperatures, the more balanced their mental, emotional universe, the more positive their outlook on life, and so much more. There are things that you can do, daily practices that you can do to help maintain or enhance your vital force. When I'm talking to people about the VIS, they always want to know, what can I do to strengthen that vitality? And it's always interesting to point out that the very same things that you do to establish health is what strengthens vitality. It's almost like the more vital one is, the healthier one is. And this turns out to be one of the laws of nature. Some folks will say that the healthier one is, the more vital. But I've not seen that you can have health without having a strong vitality. Eat well, stay hydrated, get good quality sleep, move your body often and every day. Make sure that your body's built-in detoxification systems are open and flowing. Manage stress that comes your way. Use supplements as needed to fill dietary gaps. Engage in prayer or other type of giving of gratitude, whatever practice you have. Volunteerism to help others. Manage, those things that come up each day in a way that moves you down the path towards healthier and away from the path that makes you less healthy. All these things build health in a basic way. To me, the vitality is a predictor of how healthy someone can become and how well they'll fare with infectious disease and how likely or unlikely they are to develop chronic disease. This is the VIS. This is the vital force, that which animates us. This is our level of vitality. I promised you a case. This is a case of eczema. And this is a 35-year-old man came in to see me with severe eczema and a history of topical steroids for most of his life. And he had recently been catching, this is how he saw it, he had been catching every cold that came his way, and he had experienced a significant drop in energy, and he felt like he was too young to be going through this, and I agreed with him completely. And the first thing I did was I just took a good long look at him. His eyes were dull, heavy with dark circles underneath. His skin was kind of mottled. There were rough patches everywhere, signs that he had spent a lot of time scratching and worrying at his skin. His nails were brittle and cracked. His hair lacked luster. He looked like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. I mean, he was droopy and kind of hunched over. When I took his case, I discovered he'd had eczema from a young age, about 6 months old. And he had been started on steroid creams at that time, and he'd been using them ever since. For much of his life, the creams kept the skin fairly well under control, but nothing had been working in the last 3 or 4 years. He'd also had severe ear infections as a child and ended up getting tubes around 5 years old. And he had suffered from bronchitis at least twice a year, sometimes more, and that had also been happening since he was a young child. He said over the last couple of years, he'd get a cold or something like a cold every 3 to 4 weeks, and it would last, a month, and then he would improve and he'd be okay for a couple of weeks, and then it would come right back. He was really tired of being sick, and his doctor didn't have any explanation for him or anything other than antibiotics, which he'd been on several rounds recently, many over the course of his life. Other symptoms that he was experiencing included some knee and hip pain, and these were new in the last year, and really just a lack of interest in life, a low energy, and a lack of motivation. His sleep was awful. He felt like he never could fall asleep before 3 or 4 in the morning, and then he could barely get up. If he could sleep until noon, he might feel like he got a little bit of sleep. And, all of the labs that his mainstream docs had run on him, nothing was really out of any normal parameters. His immune system was not as robust as it could have been, like his white blood cell count was low and things like that. For the homeopathic side of things, I asked specific questions that the answers I got about his skin was that everything about his skin was worse after a hot bath or shower. He really, he'd be itchy and irritable, and the skin in particular, and just in general, he wasn't good after a hot bath or shower. So he learned to just take cool showers. He intensely disliked having to stand up for any long period of time, and he really felt better if he could just sit down. His skin was itchy and dry all the time, and the only relief that he had was if he could scratch it, and he would scratch it until it started bleeding. And then it would not itch as much, but it would scab over and the scabs would itch. He described himself as a pack rat, but an organized pack rat. Everything in his house was in stacks or piles in his apartment. And the only time he felt really hungry was late morning and right before lunch, but not quite at noon. And he described the sensation that he would get an empty or hollow sensation in his stomach, and he would know he needed to eat something, which sometimes it helped and sometimes it didn't. He was very sensitive to criticism from other people, especially about things that he felt he'd spent a lot of time on and had done a really good job at it. He had a little bit, I would call it a chip on his shoulder about how intelligent he felt as compared to the other people around him. He felt like he was much smarter than them. Like I said, he'd had labs done and mostly, basic blood work, which was pretty unremarkable, except for, the little bit decrease in white blood cells. He was very tall and thin, kind of lanky. Uh, he was a mess. His clothes were a mess. He didn't put, it didn't seem he put a lot into his personal appearance. So what did I do? Well, I ordered a food sensitivity panel on him. I suspected dairy and gluten, given the skin and the ear infections and the respiratory problems since he was a child. I also did something called a Carroll method because I had just learned about evaluating food sensitivities with this approach. And I sent him home with a probiotic because of his long time use of antibiotics and these, topical steroids, some trace minerals, homeopathic sulfur, and I gave him 30C. And I asked him to use a free online service called Chronometer, 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 to track his diet for 2 weeks. I also asked him to drink nothing but water with fresh lemon squeezed in it, and gave him a guide about how much to do. And I asked him to stop all of his topical steroids. And I explained to him that he would get a flare up of the eczema on his body as the suppression stopped from the topical steroids. So we got his test results back, and his food panel, the first one, the food panels, the one that I had done for years, that test came back off the chart for gluten. And so I followed up with a test for celiac disease, and he was not positive for celiac. And the Carroll method revealed potato and fruit with grain was a problem for him. And in an upcoming episode, I'll talk about the Carroll method more in depth. So his first follow-up ended up being 3 weeks later. Usually I do it at 2 weeks, but it was 3 weeks. His skin had flared up considerably in week 2. So week 1 was relatively unremarkable for him. Week 1. Week 2, he started to get big patches of eczema all over, and early in week 3. But a few days prior to our appointment, it started to improve and it started to clear. But one thing he could report, there was way less itching. And that was all the homeopathic sulfur. I attribute it to that. I went over his food test results with him, looked over his Chronometer log, and we worked out a food plan together for the next 2 weeks. And I got him on a good multi, now that I knew, foods that he was sensitive to, and some essential fatty acids. Asked him to continue the probiotic, the minerals. I had him continue the sulfur because in the homeopathic world, what I was seeing that he was reacting to that remedy at that strength. He wanted to try and do as much with foods as he could. So we talked about fermenting foods and kefir, and making his own gluten-free bread so he could save some money instead of having to buy it because it's very expensive. He asked me about that. We talked about his sleep, which was getting better by this follow-up. And I did a constitutional hydrotherapy on him with stim and gave him instructions for doing similar hydrotherapy without stim at home every other day. And to support his detox pathways, I taught him how to do a castor oil pack over his liver, and he was to do that in between the hydrotherapy days. We had several follow-ups, but I'm going to fast forward to his 3-month follow-up. And he had gotten a really bad cold that lasted, it was about 6 weeks in, and it lasted for 5 days. And I explained this was his body detoxing. He was learning my language and how I view the body and how I can tell a body is healing. At this 3-month mark, his skin was 90% clear. And there were a few patches here and there, no itching. He was very dedicated to taking his supplements, doing his, at this point, weekly hydrotherapies, his weekly castor oil pack. He was still fine-tuning his diet, but he was doing pretty good at it. But what I saw at 3 months was vitality. Vitality had started to develop strongly and was shining through him. He was smiling, he was upbeat, full of energy, his skin complexion was looking good, his eyes were bright, And it was very clear to me at this point that his vitality was returning to him. We'll zoom all the way to 1 year. And we met about every 3 to 4 weeks at this point after his 3 month follow up. So once a month. At 1 year, he'd gone through a couple of strengths of the remedy. So we'd gone from sulfur 30C to sulfur 200C, and sulfur 1M is what he was at the end of that first year. And what we used was the eczema. So if the eczema started to come back, I would, and there were no other symptoms, which there weren't any other new symptoms, then we'd increase to the higher strength. And he didn't dose it every day, maybe, once a week or so. He kept doing hydro once a month because he loved how he felt when he did his hydros. He had his diet down pat. He had joined a hiking club and was going every weekend. He had cleaned out his apartment of all his piles, and he said that felt good. And he had recently started back at university and decided to finish up his engineering degree. He was motivated to get that done and do something. He had met a girl and he was dating. His skin was completely clear. So he came to me because of eczema and because he kept getting colds and his energy was down. Well, the skin was clear at 1 year, and he was only dosing his remedy once every 3 or 4 weeks at this point. He had no joint pain. His energy levels were great. He was sleeping well. The cold he'd had at about 6 months in for a few days, but he understood it for what it was, and he could tell his body was kicking stuff out. So he was really happy about that, and that cleared up quickly. And overall, he was doing really, really well. There wasn't a lot. We did small changes, right? We took out what was creating inflammation in his body that he was having a reaction to. We got stuff into him that was acting in a nutritionally medicinal way instead of causing problems. It was rebuilding health. These changes assisted his body, and his body did what it's designed to do, just like it is for all of us. It healed itself. He's one of many wonderful cured cases using the vitalistic approach to health. Next week, my episode will be answering questions that have come in, whatever else comes up before next week. So sort of a Q&A. Feel free to send in messages or questions that you might have, and I'll address them on that episode. I hope all of you are finding your way using this information that I'm giving you to make some small changes in your life that help your body start to regain its health and vitality and start to self-heal. Thank you always for joining me, Dr. Eli Camp on Vital Wisdom.